So good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Very warm welcome to you all. I hope you can all hear me fine. My name is Namita Datta, and I'm program manager of a global program that's called Solutions for Youth Employment at the World Bank. We'll have participants from within the bank, but also several of S4Y partners. We have quite a large number of partners, all very actively involved with youth employment. And then I'll hand it over to Gayatri. Gayatri Murthy is Senior Financial Sector Specialist with CGAP. She's done a ton of really interesting work with pilots in terms of thinking about new ways of very practical, very new ways of thinking about innovative products and programs to support financial inclusion for people who sort of fall outside the traditional system. And then, very interesting, we have a panelist from Didi. We have Siegfried Eisenmeyer, who leads the external affairs and policy work for Didi. And Didi, we all know, is a large global mobile transportation platform. So he'll really give us the perspective of a platform in terms of whatever we discuss it sort of. And then in the end, we'll have a bit of a discussion among the panelists. So I'm going to stop talking, and I just request everyone also to keep themselves muted so that we don't have any disturbance. But I hand it over to you, Oliver. Welcome, Oliver. Over to you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Namita. Good morning, everybody. It is a great pleasure being in this event. I want to thank you, Namita, for your exceptional team for the invitation. Special appreciation goes to Catalina Rodriguez, an outstanding colleague and partner. Our recent project together is an excellent example of the new area of collaboration between our institutions. I also want to thank the IDB team for the effort, in particular the IDB Lab and my home, the Labor Markets Division. I want to express my gratitude to Laura Ripani and Fermin Vivanco, who have been pillars in our collaborative efforts. This collaboration has been instrumental in enhancing the lives of people in Latin America and the Caribbean. I also like to express my appreciation to the members of this panel joining us today. This represents an excellent opportunity to exchange professional insights on how to improve job opportunities and alternative solutions for better insurance coverage globally. So let me start with the agenda. Next slide, please. It's primarily centered in Latin America and the Caribbean. However, the insights gained are applicable to various regions in the world. And there's a key message here. Recent analysis of new jobs and platforms has predominantly revolved around worker classification. However, the labor markets in less developed countries face numerous challenges, and narrowing our focus on legal definitions may impede to see the potential technological advancements in creating job opportunities. So it's in the job that we have done over the last years. I think it's important just to take that into account. This presentation encapsulates findings of a paper published last year. Its main focus is on independent work and proposing enhancements to optimize its functionality. Our aim is to provide broader and more effective coverage against risks typically addressed by Social Security, while platform work represents only a fraction of independent work that is a crucial need to enhance its operation. So Social Security systems established decades ago were designed for societies that have undergone a significant evolution. So at least, for instance, in Latin America, we are facing an old age process that is very rapid. A large fraction of the population is going to be over 65 in the next decades. So recognizing the design flaws, it becomes imperative to address these issues for better service the people in the region, particularly Latin America. At the IDB, we are committed to support countries and explore alternatives to overcome these challenges. So let's delve into the data. You can see the next slide, please. And about a quarter of the labor force in Latin America and the Caribbean, about 50 million people, can be classified as independent workers. So not only this demographic is highly diverse, so it's not the same in each country. And if any, we have seen an increase over the last years for some countries. So probably this is correlated with the appearance of new technologies, but there is a lot of research that needs to be focused on this topic. If we go to the next slide, we can see that the majority within this group does not contribute to Social Security, rendering them informal. And this is quite worrying because technological changes can generate more incentives to increase the proportion of independent workers. And in this slide, we highlight there is encompasses most independent workers within the highest quantile of the income distribution. While some are covered, the majority sidestep contribution payments, resulting in being uninsured. So the extreme cases are Mexico and Peru, where regardless of the income level, nobody contributes to Social Security, and they are facing lots of risks. If we go to the next slide, please. So in this context, the platform work or the gig work has emerged as a new variable. There's a new layer of complication. Next slide, please. So traditional schemes were originally crafted based on the employment status of workers, typically the head of a household, following one job, one scheme approach. However, this paradigm has shifted. The tenure in the jobs for the majority of workers is now shorter than in the past, and platform work induces additional incentives for this flexibility. While gig work has been present in Latin America for centuries, the contemporary opportunity lies in leveraging technology to address the insurance needs associated with this type of work. Contrary to the past, today the cost of reaching individuals is remarkably low, with the primary challenge of being how to adapt products and services to streamline insurance for these dynamic employment scenarios. So what I'm trying to say is, in the past or decades ago, it was extremely costly to get the people and find ways for them to contribute. And now I think technology opens the opportunity to find ways to cover them. Next slide. And the technology is also having it's increasing the incentives for being this type of job, or being in this type of job. So platform work has generated big incentives. We can see here two graphs. The left one is the number of hours people work on average in each country. That's the blue line. And the navy line shows the number of hours of workers using Workana, which is the leading freelancing platform in the region. And we can unveil the potential here. So this is a result of a survey that was a collaborative initiative between the IDB and the World Bank. And the individuals in this platform work on average of about 15 hours per week, and yet earn 8 times per hour compared to an average formal worker. So this underscores the considerable economic incentive associated with freelancing compared to traditional formal job. Next slide. So in addition to this survey at the IDB, we have established partnerships with major platforms in the region, obtaining valuable insights from a diverse array of them, just to know what they think. So what are their living conditions? So we have amazed and extensive information on the characteristics, aspirations, and financial health of individuals engaging with these platforms. So, however, and acknowledging that the critique of self-selection among respondents, we have taken steps to address this concern. And in addition to this type of surveys, we have initiated data collection efforts similar to labor surveys to broaden our understanding. So due to financial constraints, we focus on megalopolis in Latin America. And I'm going to show you, or let me provide you with a quick snapshot of respondents in Mexico City last year. So it's just going to give us a good sense of what the open population, how many people are working here, and what are their characteristics. So for this megalopolis, between 2 and 3% of the labor force has engaged with the platforms to generate income. This percentage is considerably lower than observed in other megalopolis in high-income countries, such as, I don't know, New York City, London. But however, this is it's becoming more and more important. If we go to the next slide. So platform work is not considered a full-time job. The average hours per week using them is about 29 hours. And more than half of the people do not want to work more hours. So it's not, they have the option, they don't do it. So that this refers that the option of increasing their hours is pretty much closed. So in the next slide, we can see that 1/3 use more than one platform. So there is a lot of controversy on how many platforms they are using at the same time. And according to this survey, it's only 1/3 of them use more than one on a regular basis. They can have many, or they can be subscribed to many of them, but they use mainly one. The next slide, please. The majority of persons consider their participation as a temporary occupation, and 70% of them will take another job, which is, it's quite interesting for Latin America. If you see, given the numbers that we have collected for in the surveys, we see that at least for instance, for ride hailing, population using these type of platforms are very well educated. So it will be not desirable, in my opinion, to anchor people with high levels of education to these type of occupations where it can be done by a person with only a few years of education. So as a society, it will be better just to find ways to put people in better jobs and more productive jobs. If you go to the next slide, however, there is a very positive view on the functioning of platforms, and it's really important just to see that it's not only those who answer or responded who are users of the platform. So if we go to the next slide, so let me see, or the purpose of this body of evidence is to support the specific recommendations on how to improve people's lives in Latin America and the Caribbean. For this purpose, we created the Laboratory of Digital Social Security, and where we use behavioral, if you go to the next slide, please, where we use behavioral tools and technology to test and evaluate mechanisms for the effective digital insurance of independent workers in the region. So we basically have information, and we want to go beyond that, so one step forward. And it's just to test pilots, and that's why it's so important just to join forces, not only with platforms, but with other members or participants in the ecosystem, to try to find ways to support suggestions for governments on how to improve independent insurance. So before going forward to do more pilots, we wanted to first map where are the areas of opportunity. And if you can see in the publication, if you go to the next slide, that, well, one thing that we learned is that there are no general solutions for every country. There are principles, but specific solutions need to be tailored to the reality of each country. So each country has a unique set of institutions and complexities. And to address this diversity, we introduced what's called the service blueprint. These blueprints, they outline, or we try to outline, the journey that an independent worker must navigate to attain effective coverage in each country, spanning from the initial step to enrollment in a regular insurance scheme. So it's like there are many areas of opportunities. If you read the document, you can see where can we identify specific processes that can facilitate the enrollment of independent workers using the traditional system. So we're just outlining or improving the current one. Obviously, policy changes that involve more legislative processes are very complicated, but at least in this area, we can do more for these independent workers. And as a summary, if you go to the next slide, in our research, we identified the following key findings. Addressing the issue of insufficient coverage goes beyond the creation of electronic portals for worker registration or altering definitions in the labor laws alone. So there is some idea that you can put like a portal and everything is going to be solved. That's not the case. It is crucial to enhance multiple processes to ensure effective coverage for workers, and includes obviously the registry, aggregating income sources to calculate contributions, creating new flexible products, implementing automatic discounts and debits, coordinating with the tax system, also with the financial system. And it's now we are seeing a revolution in the fintech industry in Latin America, just to work together with them to find new products with these new participants, and obviously aligning in tax incentives and social protection programs to avoid double protections. So as you were saying before, Namita, there is a lot of volatility in the income, but there are ways to try. We can find ways to at least to find a minimum over time and generate incentives to keep people working. So while some countries have incorporated some of these elements, there remains an ample room for improvement. So in the summary, if you go to the last slide, new technologies have revolutionized aspects of our lives, including communication. Next slide, please. Communication, coexistence, consumption, and work. And the key element, next, is flexibility. So the flexibility is there you go. The next one. Flexibility is the name of the game. In the case of labor markets, they have increased incentives for independent work. We haven't seen this immediately because there are many factors such as the pandemic, but we must explore new alternatives for their effective insurance. Specific recommendations tailored to each country are detailed in our publication, at least for Latin America. And I think if you go to the next slide, we need to refine or adapt the reality of the systems to the reality of many millions of people who are working in the informal sector. So this includes the plan for individual workers, use of electronic and behavioral economics, complementarity with other systems such as the financial system, and there's a lot of room, and we can work together. And elements or instruments or tools like the lab can help to guide this discussion with the governments just to test, because we don't know many things, and it'll be really important for our institutions and also joint forces to try to find and test things just to give the evidence to governments on how to better tailor solutions for this type of workers. Next slide, please. And just want to say, this is the publication, the QR code. You can download it. It's also in the webpage of the bank, of the IDB. And finally, just want to thank again Namita for this great experience of working together, and hope we can start new projects in the future. Thank you again, and very happy to participate in the panel.
Thank you so much, Oliver. And I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, there's so much, there's a lot of literature and concern about gig workers and the fact that they tend to fall outside labor regulation, outside social security systems. But perhaps the need of the hour is to use this as an opportunity to innovate and design new types of products. And you're absolutely right. I think technology is allowing us sort of new ways of thinking about products, but also processes. And more innovation is needed. So thank you. We'll come back for sort of digging a little bit deeper into your excellent report. I want to hand it over now to Himanshi. Himanshi Jain is a Senior Social Protection Specialist at the World Bank. And Himanshi, over to you. You'll share a bit your work on Rwanda.
Thanks, Namita, and thanks to the organizing team for inviting me to share about the work and experience in this area. And it's an honor to be here on this panel. And next slide. Let's start by talking about sachets. Now, for those of you who might not be familiar by what you're seeing, these are essentially small shampoo sachets, which growing up in India, you would find in almost every street corner. They were really a marketing genius idea that came about in the 1970s. But what was particularly surprising for me when I did some Googling to find out, how much market share they have, it was very interesting to see that in India, these sachets now make up 95% of industry sales and 60% of sales value. Now, that's a massive number for this consumer products category. And if you look back at the motivation behind introducing these sachets, it was really because back then these companies said we need to create a product that would meet the needs of the middle and low income population, which is a sizable group, and it meets the need and it meets their cash flow availability. So now why am I talking about sachets in a conversation on social protection? I bring it up to drive home the point that we need to develop innovative design, think of delivery, and think of incentives to ensure that the substantial missed middle, which Namita spoke about, it does get protected. So in the next 10 minutes that I have, I want to cover some conceptual material on what we mean by the missed middle and share an example from Ejoheza, a scheme in Rwanda, whose implementation yields some valuable lessons. Next slide. Now, to quickly go over this, it's not a surprise. The informal sector size is massive in Africa and also in parts of Asia and other regions. And the contribution to GDP is also substantial. It varies across countries, but on average, it's pretty high. And this group is distinct relative to the formal sector. But what COVID has also shown us is that unless this group is protected, it can take much longer for countries to bounce back from shocks. So there's a much larger macroeconomic case to, not just an individual welfare, but macroeconomic case to protect these groups. Next slide. In Africa, however, these groups are not adequately protected, and the same holds true for many low and middle income countries. The coverage of social safety net programs is very low. It's generally targeted to the extreme poor. And the low share of formal labor force means that traditional social insurance coverage does not extend to these groups. Now, this leaves a significant group, which we're loosely referring to as the missed middle. Next slide. We did some analysis to try and get a sense of how big is the size of the missed middle. And it ranges, you can see from the bottom left graph, it ranges from anywhere from 32% in Zambia to 74% in Uganda. These groups are not poor enough, so they're not going to necessarily get social assistance when a shock hits, and they're not stable enough with stable jobs to contribute to social security. Now, what's also interesting is that this group is fairly heterogeneous. So it can be useful to split this group further into resilient and non-resilient groups. We have done this analysis in our report using household survey data. And we define resilient households as those which, when faced with a shock, are able to cope with it and don't have to adopt any damaging coping strategies like taking their children out of school or reducing food consumption. And we term these groups as the resilient and the rest as the non-resilient missed middle. Now, the advantage of splitting this large missed middle into these two further subcategories is that it allows policymakers to better design and target and tailor incentives for this heterogeneous group. Because the reality of many low and middle income countries is also that they do not have the fiscal resources to necessarily offer large-scale incentives to that entire group. So this is just a path towards getting to universal social security. Next slide. Now, two quick things to remember when we are considering any scheme for this group. It's very similar to formal sector workers. These individuals also face risk across the life cycle. And I would argue that they face much more risks across the life cycle and do not have enough protection. So locking their savings by offering them an ironclad pension schemes sometimes works against their needs. And this is what we've also seen across experiences in different countries. And flexibility really is key, as Oliver also mentioned. So we really need to think of a suite of social protection instruments for this group and design schemes that will balance the short-term and the long-term risks. Next slide. Now, coming back to examples from marketing, two themes really emerged. First is that replicating social insurance the way it has worked in EU and OECD countries, the traditional way, is unlikely to work in these contexts because labor markets are so different. Second is that we might want to consider bundled products that will cater to a mix of short and long-term needs for this group, and think of things like flexibility in payments so that it makes it easier for these groups to actually contribute to social insurance. Next slide. At an operational level, what that means is thinking of designs which build on foundational platforms, IDs, and payment systems. These help keep costs low, it keeps operations efficient and accessible. Second is to link them to other data systems like social registries or tax databases that will allow you to target incentives better. Links even with banks, as is done in India's schemes, or with post offices, which is done in Vietnam's schemes for informal sector. They can also be very useful to collect contributions and to provide benefit payments. Now, the schemes itself will need to be designed and again tailored based on the needs of that country's particular missed middle. And it can take many forms. And we've actually published multiple reports on schemes in Asia and Africa. And you can see that the wide variety in design that emerges. Now, in the interest of time, I'm going to share with you an example from Rwanda, where we just completed a report. And the term Ejoheza, that's what their scheme is called, it actually translates to better future. And it's a very apt name. Next slide. The scheme was launched in 2018 And we reviewed this scheme in 2021 when we released the report. And in just 4 years, they had covered 27% of the working age population in Rwanda. Tremendous feat. Just for comparison's sake, their formal sector coverage is anywhere between 3 to 4%. Now, it is a voluntary defined contribution scheme, and it has three main incentives. First is that it offered matching contributions, and they differ the matching contributions based on the Ubudehe category. That's their sort of household social registry, right? They rank households into four categories. The poorest households got the highest matching. Second is they gave a lump sum funeral and life insurance benefit to anyone who met the minimum savings amount, which was about $18 a year. And third is they gave flexibility to withdraw. So once you've hit 4 million Rwandan francs, which is about $4,000, once you have that in your account, you can withdraw up to 40% in excess of that 4,000. So these are the three sort of unique incentives that were offered under the scheme. As you can see, the scheme actually did have a very good gender balance, and about 78% of the people were contributing regularly. Remember, this is a voluntary scheme. Now, one of the challenges that we found with the scheme was that adequacy was still relatively low. People were still saving around $9 to $13 a year. And that was one of the areas where we focused our recommendations on. Next slide. Now, I want to share some interesting insights we picked from a phone survey of EJOHESA members. So we interestingly saw a lot of farmers contributing to the scheme. They made smaller contributions, but they were consistent contributors. Now, this came as a surprise to us initially because this was the lowest Ubudehe categories, and we weren't necessarily expecting a lot of individuals from this group to be saving. But digging deeper into the analysis, we uncovered a unique mobilization strategy of EJOHESA, that they were essentially using the cooperatives, which is very common in India, to convince these members to join. So once the cooperative, which has about 3,000 members on average, once the cooperative decides to join, the members are automatically enrolled into EJOHESA. So in some sense, the cooperative has now become the employer, where it automatically deducts the chosen contribution by the individual and transfers it to the EJOHESA scheme. So this is essentially an aggregator that can observe and deduct contributions. And this was a key reason for the fast coverage expansion in Rwanda. We also found that individuals, next slide, trusted banks and mobile money operators. So one of the recommendations, especially given urban coverage was so low, was to try and see if these institutions, which are more common in urban settings, could be used as aggregators as well. Next slide. Lastly, our survey found that the informal sectors feels a strong need to save for old age. They understand the importance of saving for old age, but they also self-report to be unprepared. Now, this just sheds even more evidence on the fact that there's much more onus on governments and practitioners to try and close this gap. So to close, last slide, we have distilled some lessons from the EJOHESA scheme, which could be useful for other similar schemes. And I want to simply point out a couple that stand out to me personally. First is that Rwanda has actually set targets at the district levels, and this really motivated healthy competition among districts and exchange of ideas. They would actually hold, sessions where they would announce the top 5 districts. So it was really very encouraging. They had a very strong political will, especially since, and this is very important because such schemes have teething troubles to begin with, to try and figure out what design, what processes will actually work for the country. They require huge spendings on communication and mobilization. So to have that political will is really important. Having aggregators, and this could be gig platforms in some cases, it could be cooperatives, banks, or telcos, or a mix of all of them. And lastly, having clear communication so people understand the rules, they can check their balances, they can access benefits easily. EJOHESA had another unique feature. It had a 24/7 call center, which was very successful, and it was always very busy. So with that, I would like to end my presentation, and you can find links to our reports with details of such schemes in the chat box. Thanks a lot once again.
Thank you. Thank you, Himanshi. And thank you for really making it come alive with really practical operational ideas. And your point about bundling of services in order to meet the real needs of people is so important. Our survey found the same thing, that a lot of people said while they want all the social security benefits, they also want, in addition, training. They want access to credit, which is not a traditional sort of, you won't think traditionally about it in a package of social security. But those are things, particularly the youth, really wanted additional resources to train. And I think your point about the importance of an intermediary is spot on. We found the same thing, that, which is why it's very attractive in some ways to partner with digital platforms, because you have an automatic means of identification. Everybody on a platform has a digital identity in some sense. And number two, they're all familiar with digital means of payment. And third, we also found interesting examples where governments, for example, in Malaysia, are partnering with platforms to do this matching contribution. So they do a little bit of a top up, but also the platform there, I think it was Grab in the case of Malaysia, that also did a bit of a top up to their top freelancers. So I think there are all kinds of ways of taking some of the insights you pointed out today and thinking about the design of this new generation of products. But I know that we are really running tight on time. I should stop here. But over to you, Gayatri. Gayatri Murthy is a senior financial sector specialist with CGAP. CGAP, as you know, works particularly on financial inclusion. And they did a ton of really interesting work in terms of thinking about product design in particular. Gayatri?
Yeah, thanks, Namita. So really interesting discussion so far. And I think what the perspective I'll bring to it is on the innovation side of things. What are products looking like? And how is the private sector participating in some of these innovation spaces? So as you've clearly understood, right, this space is a space where a lot of different things intersect. So the nature of work, the kind of provision of social benefits, but also digital innovation and the potential of really doing social impact using the benefits of penetration of digital technologies. So it's a really multidisciplinary kind of topic that we're discussing here. And I think this space, the perspective I come from is that of financial inclusion. How do we take an opportunity like the increase of gig platform work in the world as an opportunity to really provide added services to this new class of workers, but also do so in a way that's impactful and really leads to inclusion. So in that large group of informal workers that Himanshi pointed out to, there is now, as we see, a new category of workers coming up around the world, right? Both in developed and developing spaces. And that's this gig worker that largely does work using a smartphone and typically has to use the smartphone to in fact earn their living. Now, this represents a fairly frontier space for us because normally it's really hard to get financial services to informal workers for all the reasons that have already been stated. What the platform space lets us do, if used correctly, is really provide those digital rails, right, to that customer or to that worker segment. And then, as Namita just mentioned, right, vast amounts of identifiable data, which can be anonymized but still utilized for a fair amount of credit worthiness building, other kinds of information and insights that really fuel product innovation. So the potential is immense. However, this is a fairly new space and there's a lot of innovation kind of hurdles to get over, but also regulatory infrastructure hurdles to get over. So it's not a space that I would say is thriving and maturing. Further, this segment is a really interesting segment, right? So on the one hand, they're a step above those who are really in the lower end of informal work because they are digitally literate, largely working in urban spaces and use a smartphone not only to necessarily get their work, but potentially for entertainment and many other kind of purposes. So this is a kind of digitally savvy crowd, yet not a group of people who are quite used to doing financial services on the smartphone. So that's the catch there, right? Like where you have the opportunity, but you're not really dealing with a kind of group that is very comfortable in using financial services online. Next slide. So the work that CGAP did and that I led a few years ago in this space is to really work directly with some platforms and fintechs working on financial services, specifically for the worker group. There's a lot of financial services out there for people like us using platforms, right? So you go on to Amazon, or if you're a big merchant selling on Amazon, you can get credit today, or you can get a buy now, pay later kind of prompt as a customer. But what about the worker class, the class of people doing deliveries, delivering food and groceries, ride hailing, etc. So that's the space we really focused on and tried to understand various products there, but I'll focus on insurance since that's the topic here. And what we really notice is that these services today in a commercial way really only exist where payment rails are advanced, right? So you can't really bring services like this into the market unless you have mature payment systems in the country that people can use and services can build upon, right? So it's not something that develops as easily in India as it does in Cote d'Ivoire. Like there's a difference of maturation of innovation and what kind of innovation is allowed to happen. The platform economy has to be thriving itself. Secondly, I think very interesting that both Himanshi, Namita, you mentioned bundling. I mean, that's a great, I think, idea that comes up for us as well. That, can we bundle a complex product like insurance with something else that people require? And here, sorry, can you stick to the previous slide? Yeah. And here, the issue that really comes up is the regulation is not quite there. So for instance, if you have to provide an insurance and credit product together today on a platform, right? The number of regulation kind of gaps that you have to take care of. So you need the main regulator, the insurance regulator. You need to know if platforms can provide financial services, or do you need to bring a fintech in? A lot of that is still being figured out. And it really inhibits a lot of this tailoring, bundling, customization that we hope to see in years to come. And finally, platforms themselves, even in partnerships, are not necessarily the best providers of financial services naturally. They understand the digital space. They understand how to attract workers in that space, but providing insurance is a whole different ball game, right? That requires skill sets, requires know-how, requires understanding what works for this segment for insurance. That's still being built. Next slide. So of the products we saw, I'll talk a little bit about them while explaining some of these good principles that exist, right? So when products work, when insurance works, what's going right? And how can we encourage more of that going forward? So the first thing to notice is that this is a space that workers are already using, right, to get their gigs. So if we can seamlessly bring financial services in here in the right context, that's the opportunity, right? So we looked at two insurance products in our work. One was an insurance product for sellers on an e-commerce platform in Nigeria. And another insurance product was for ride hailers, not just for their rides, which is the most common form of insurance available today. You just insure their rides. And that's of the least utility for someone like that, right? Okay, you're insuring my ride, but what about actual utility and use for me as a customer? So instead of that per ride insurance, what we looked at is, can you incentivize with a little bit of kind of training, information, can you make a ride hailer pay for health insurance for their family? So we looked at the e-commerce kind of seller and the ride hailer, and we tried insurance in both these environments. And what we realized is the e-commerce seller, when he comes on to sell, is not really looking to buy health insurance for themselves. So the right context was not being built in that seamless kind of environment. Whereas for the ride hailer, I think because big ride hailing companies have a fair amount of interaction with their drivers, there's a lot of opportunity to educate, to sell, to build trust, and to slowly test and introduce new products. So it worked better there. Second, there's this whole notion of simplicity, right? So I think a lot of times what happens with insurance, and especially insurance for low income people, is that we tend to forget this principle of simplicity. That even though there's a trusted channel in platforms, you can't suddenly sell very complicated insurance products with large terms of conditions and these complex ways to enroll, right? So the same thing that happened, this is something that happened on the e-commerce test as well, where we wanted to provide the insurance for free as a way to see if people sign on. But because the insurance regulation demands that an insurance customer has to pay, even if it's $1, they still have to pay for it themselves. We couldn't provide it for free. And we had to take the worker onto the seller onto another page, get them to enroll there, and then it failed, right? So simplicity is really important. And related to simplicity is this notion that all can't be digital for this customer just yet, especially not for insurance. So multi-dimensional tech and touch, really trying to not only put everything online, but actually coming up with smart kind of interactions that are a mix of digital and physical where possible. And this is more likely where platforms already engage with their worker class in physical ways, which happens in ride hailing a lot, which happens in deliveries to some extent, but not that much. And finally, we're trying to build behavior here, right? We're trying to take a new type of customer, and we're trying to see if this new environment can create digital behaviors, digital comfort, and therefore small, regular, and automatic is the last principle I'll speak about. That's really important for to get right here and to ensure that when services are provided, they are anticipated by the customer, the deductions make sense, etc. Perhaps I'll stop here, yeah, and hand over back to Namita. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Gayatri. There was a lot of nuance there in what you were talking about that I wanted to dig deeper in, but I think that I haven't done a good job keeping time. But I wanted to turn to you now, Siegfried. Siegfried, you work with Didi, which is a large platform. So we've heard all of these wonderful discussions. A lot of it coming from the development organizational sort of perspective, from the bank, from CGAP, from IDB. But you are the one in the hot seat, right? You have a pulse, a sense of the pulse of the gig workers' needs. You interact with them, you deal with them. This is your bread and butter. I just wanted to give you like a few sort of minutes to just reflect on all that you heard. Like, is there anything that struck you as, yes, this is right? Or anything that struck you as, no, this is not going to work from any of the three presentations? Like, just anything you want to reflect on as a reaction.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Namita, for the introduction and for having me in this important and valuable event. It's great to have this space, and I also really want to greet and thank my fellow panel members, Himanshi, Gayatri, and Oliver. It's really great to learn from such experienced professionals. So very quickly, my name is Siegfried, and as you said, I work in the central policy team at Didi. Didi, as you might know, maybe is a leading mobility technology platform that offers a different range of app-based services in Latin America, but also in Australia, Egypt, Japan, and China. And for example, in Latin America, Didi services range from providing ride-hailing services, taxi-hailing, motor-hailing, as well as delivering food and groceries from local restaurants and stores. And we also have a business line around financial services. And as you know, through our platform, and this has been mentioned during the webinar, Didi provides drivers and couriers with opportunities to generate income while having flexible schedules. We know that drivers, couriers value this flexibility and independence and do not want to be employed by platforms in a traditional way. So many times drivers and couriers look for ways to earn a complementary income. And in that regard, the way people earn income nowadays through digital platform really has changed. And in that context, I really applaud and appreciate the discussion and the examples and the learnings that have been shared. I think one common theme reacting and reflecting on those presentations is the importance of collaboration. And also here, one of Didi's core values is win-win collaboration. So this really refers to how we look at ourselves as a company within society. And in that regard, collaborating with different actors such as authorities, international organizations, universities, and NGOs is very important for us. And also, and this is key, putting at the center what drivers and couriers want and need in that particular context. And maybe I can talk a little bit more about that, about the preferences that drivers and couriers have shared with us. And it has come up before in the session, but I really want to emphasize that again. We see around the world that drivers and couriers immensely value the flexibility, independence, and choice they have when connecting to Didi. And this has been consistent through surveys we run on our own, but also through surveys that were done by third parties or by competitors. And this drivers and couriers enjoy deciding when to connect, for how long to connect, in which area to connect, and also to what platform to connect, or maybe they even connect to multiple platforms at the same time. And not only do drivers and couriers enjoy these characteristics, but we also see in their behavior that drivers and couriers frequently vary the duration and moment when they connect to Didi, depending on their personal circumstances and needs. A second topic is also that a considerable percentage of drivers and couriers see in Didi a complementary source of income. So just an example, between 33% and up to 39% of couriers use Didi to generate a complement to their income. Or in the case of drivers, for example, in the Dominican Republic, even 59% of drivers consider Didi a complementary source of income since they also pursue other activities. And another theme is, I briefly mentioned that before, is that, and it also comes up in service around the world in different countries, drivers and couriers do not want to be employees in a traditional sense. They choose Didi to generate income while being independent and flexible, often alongside or instead of traditional forms of work. And the last one, Oliver also touched on it a little bit. The last one is about earnings, which is another key reason for drivers and couriers to use Didi. And here we have seen just another stat from surveys is that between 67% and up to 74% of couriers consider that their earnings increased to compared to their previous activity. And for example, on the side of the drivers, one example from Argentina, 65% of drivers consider their earnings have increased. So this really shows how attractive Didi and digital platforms in general are for people to generate earnings. So referring a little bit back to the main theme of this webinar when it comes to discussing new solutions for social protections, for them to be successful, I think it will be key to take into account those preferences of people who earn income through platforms, and also take into account the learnings that we have gathered from the examples that have been mentioned. Innovative solutions, so technology, digital platforms have changed the way people earn income around the way, and now it's important to rethink the way we can facilitate access to social protection for independent workers while preserving the characteristics that drivers and couriers value the most.
So, Siegfried, you said the importance of flexibility for workers, the importance of giving them choice, when to work, which platform to work with, and the opportunity to earn an additional income. So it's not just complementary income, but also income smoothing, which both Gayatri and Oliver also mentioned, and Himanshi, is that during periods of disruption or certain challenges in life, you can turn to this kind of work to supplement your income. Now, from the point of view of the policymaker, Siegfried, platforms can be very attractive because it allows the policymakers to reach this section of people. You are like an intermediary that Himanshi was mentioning is very important. From your point of view, it might be interesting also to work with the government, because if it allows you to provide certain kinds of facilities like insurance products to your workers, it builds your reputation, number one. It attracts more workers to your platform. It gives you this image of being a good platform, right? So there could be something win-win. How might you, if let's say there was an ideal world, how might you think about a very specific kind of a product where perhaps you might, like a tripartite relationship between you, maybe another private company, like a fintech or a bank, and the government? Like, could you, what would that look like? Like, what would this tripartite product look like?
Yes, thank you for your question. So I think I already talked a little bit about the importance of collaboration. So collaborating and partnering with different actors is really key, both from the public sector as well as from the private sector. I guess the second one, which is key, is to understand the needs and preferences of drivers and couriers. And one project we did in the past in Mexico was about voluntary saving contributions, right? And there, what we did actually was first we ran a survey to understand what drivers and couriers preferred, and also how they thought about voluntary saving for retirement. And what we then did, we noticed in that survey that while many, of course, as it has been mentioned previously, want to save for retirement, we also see the importance of communicating more materials and more explanations about the importance and about different ways how to voluntarily save for retirement. So what we did is we took advantage of those channels to reach drivers and couriers. And as you know, digital platforms have different channels. We can communicate via email, we can communicate in app via push-up messages or pop-up messages or push notifications. And we shared with drivers and couriers a whole set of materials around certain core concepts of financial education, such as inflation, such as interest rate, the importance of saving. And those materials, we prepared them together with the Mexican Saving Authority, CONSAR, and also together with the IDB. And these materials were then shared with the drivers and couriers so that they could inform themselves about those concepts, but also learn how easily they can actually do contributions to their accounts through an existing digital app, which is called Affordamobil. So this app already existed, and I think this is another key lesson here is taking advantage of existing digital channels and technologies that we can use to make it easier for drivers and couriers, for example, to voluntarily save. So this is an example of what we did and of an important collaboration between different actors, government, international organization, digital platform, and that also put at center what drivers and couriers needed.
So in other words, so making it kind of seamless, making it simple, just exactly the criteria that Gayatri was listing seems to stand out, right, in your experience. And since you mentioned that this was done in collaboration with IDB, Oliver, do you want to jump in and just share what stood out for you in terms of learning from that pilot that you did with DD in Mexico? Just any like sort of 30
Yeah, absolutely. So 1 minute. I think it was a very important contribution in a sense that you can spend millions of dollars in technological solutions, but if they don't serve the purpose of facilitating things to workers, it's useless. And given the technological change, it can become obsolete in a matter of months. So that's why if you ask workers if they want to save for retirement, obviously many or the great majority tell you, of course, I want to save. But once you do it, it's not that clear that they want to do it. So in that experience before writing this paper that I presented was very useful to understand what people think, what's the day-to-day decisions they need to make, and that's why we created these blueprints. And in the case of Mexico, it's clear that they have a very important environment ecosystem of technological solutions for retirement, but nobody's using them. And the key part is that the income sources are not linked to that. And that's why it's so important to work together with the government in the financial sector, just to make, for you to pay what is fair. It's like if you are earning this amount of money and you need to pay this amount, that's the correct way to do it. And if not, then you can, complement this with other social protection programs. So in a word, it's very useful, and the experience of having the private sector working together also with the government was the insights were really important.
Yeah. I know that we have run out of time, but I can't resist like a 10-second question to both Gayatri and Himanshi, if you want to jump in. I'm just curious, or anybody actually on the panel, I'm curious would there be an additional thing we need to think about if we were catering not just to informal gig workers, but also particularly women or young people? Like, is there a product tweak that would need to happen if we are targeting youth or women? And I know, Gayatri, you work a lot on the gender agenda, but I don't want to put you on the spot, but just any quick, like 5-second reaction.
Yeah, 5-second reaction is that, yes, I think those segments do warrant a slightly different approach, because research shows that actually women are far more interested in products like savings and insurance than male counterparts. And so I think the interest is there, but the tweaking and the tailoring comes in the product features, in the way the products are introduced and marketed. And similarly for youth, I would say that it's in how the product is laid out, rather than in any kind of big design consideration. So thanks.
I'll just share something we found in Vietnam. Vietnam has an informal sector scheme, and the government is actually, this year, they're putting in law some new incentives for the informal sector scheme. And they were planning to include a maternity benefit component. And we did a survey to try and see whether people would, be more likely to save and so on. And interestingly, we found that women actually preferred a sickness benefit, which is time off when you're sick, over a maternity benefit. And men preferred occupational hazard, this is an addition, in the bundling piece, over maternity benefit. Younger individuals prefer that maternity benefit, so it was very interesting to see in the survey, and it sort of makes sense if you think about it, depending on the age profile, depending on what you think is a much more important risk to get coverage against, your preferences change. So I guess the trick here is to try and figure out how do you want to balance these diverse needs and, not open the Pandora's box, but have enough flexibility in that bundling.
Yeah, and I guess you think that you might need that maternity benefit a couple times in your lifetime, but sickness happens a lot more often. But we've run out of time. I'm sure that we all had much more questions to ask of each other as well, but also questions from the audience. We just didn't have time to go to it. But a big thank you to the wonderful panelists today. Thank you for sharing your insights. Thank you, Oliver. Thank you, Himanshi. Thank you, Gayatri. And thank you, Sigfrid. Big thank you to you all. We will share the recording publicly, of course, and also the wonderful reports that are already in the chat. You can download them and feel free to reach out to the authors if you have more questions. A big thank you. We'll close here.